Well, feel free to ask questions like as we go. We'd love to have more of like conversation. I think that is how people tend to learn best. But then, yeah, we'll also take questions at the end. So, but yeah, we'll not be offended if you guys want to just chime in and interrupt. And so, just like disclaimers, a lot of times we'll use kind of gendered language, but like reality is the majority of victims we see are female identifying. We do see male identifying victims as well, but it's a lot less common, or they're a lot less reported. And then the vast majority of our buyers are male. Traffickers, it kind of can depend. But so that is just like the caveat. And then just like a little bit of background on me. So I've been in this position for about 2 years. I locally, before this, I worked in domestic violence, and then I had some experience abroad working with survivors of trafficking in a long-term aftercare setting. So it's really helpful to just kind of see all the different angles and intersections. And of course, this topic, it intersects in a lot of different areas, whether that's domestic violence or whether we're talking about like sexual assault, or we're talking about like kind of activity involvement or organized, crime, assault, so many different things. In line with poverty, people who are unhoused, etc. Okay, so we're going to cover what commercial sexual exploitation is, the impact of human trafficking, both globally, locally, etc. We're going to talk about life, what that means, crime trends, recruitment, victimology, and complex trauma, and then criminal justice and advocate collaboration. So first off, the question is, what are the epidemics? So if you do a very quick just Google search, human trafficking, these are the pictures that come up. So I am curious when you guys look at these photos, just like what your immediate reactions are, what your takeaways are.
Oregon, high five forward.
Yeah.
Makes me want to rip my heart out. That's the impact it has on me.
Physically restrained is what I'm thinking.
Very young. Mm-hmm. Scary.
Sometimes it's not always tied up and stuff too.
It looks easy to spot, but it's not that easy to spot.
Very real practice for most of us in here.
It makes me want to help. It makes me want to do more.
Yeah. So I think you guys touched on some of the key things here. One being like physical bondage, like being in these pictures seeming like really obvious. You have, people like tied up. You have written on this person's hands like "help me," and so of course, like anyone who sees someone in this situation, they're like, oh, they need help. They need to be rescued, quote unquote. They're really young.
These images, I think that was a really key point. These images elicit a very sympathetic response. Anything you see is like, oh yeah, I want to help that. Unfortunately, that's not what we see. Something
No, yeah. So, there's a lot of messaging here that is very like sensationalized, and it's kind of in line with what we see in like movies. But then, as far as what trafficking actually looks like here in the U.S., we know that less than 5% of cases nationally involve kidnapping. Most of the time, the bondage is psychological, not physical. And instead, the individuals that we're working with normally look more like those in these photos. So, what are your takeaways when you look at these pictures?
looks like parts of our community.
Lost youth. Vulnerability.
If they don't want help necessarily.
Anything else?
Runaway population.
Yeah.
And probably elicits a less sympathetic response from most adults that see it. Most adults would see this and think like, oh, troubled youth, kids that might be in trouble in school or something like that.
Yeah, and the point, oftentimes they are runaway youth, youth who are involved in foster care, that 68% of youth in foster care experience commercial sexual exploitation at some point. That is a huge number. 68. And most of the time we are dealing with teenagers. The most common age of entry into the sex industry is 15 in the state of Oregon. Nationally, it's between 13 to 15. But that's really young. And so, oftentimes they are youth who have experienced a whole lot of vulnerabilities already. So they, might have been abused growing up. They might have experienced sexual assaults. They might, just have general unstable home life and unstable relationships. They might be involved in the underground economy in some way. And so traffickers know how to find those youth, know how to target those youth, and use their vulnerabilities against them eventually. So it's hidden in plain sight.
So we know that when there's familial trafficking involved, it can be a lot younger than 13. It can be very young, familial trafficking.
So the question is, how do they get from there in those top pictures, just any normal kid to being missing, to being on the run, to being exploited in this way? So first we're going to start with definitions. So what is sex trafficking? The federal definition is it's the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purposes of commercial sex act in which it's induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which they're not yet 18. So if they're a minor, irrelevant of how they got there, they are considered legally a victim. If they're an adult, then legally speaking, in order to prove it, there has to be force, fraud, or coercion. And then commercial sexual exploitation is more of the umbrella term. So it is basically a sex act in exchange for anything of value. And then same thing, if it's a minor, then there doesn't have to be force, fraud, or coercion. If it's an adult, it has to be force, fraud, or coercion. So those are situations where you're seeing much more of maybe, sex in exchange for drugs, or sex in exchange for a roof over your head, or food, or sense of safety, whatever that thing is. It doesn't have to be money. And then trafficking, there's a third part. So as far as the international impact, we know it's a global criminal enterprise, the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the 21st century. When you think about it, like drugs, guns, those are one-time sales. When we're talking about people, you can continue to sell them, so you can make a lot of money. So these are very rough estimates. By 2006, it was estimated to be a $32 billion industry, whereas 2016, that number jumped to $150 billion.
Wow.
I would say that number is probably far higher.
Wow.
And then we know that 71% of trafficking victims are reported to be women and girls, and 29% men and boys.
We also know that there's a lot of intersection, not just a lot of intersection, there's always intersection between those that are moving guns and drugs and those that are moving people, just same people benefiting off of them.
As far as Oregon statistics go, so a lot of this movement in Oregon started in Portland and with the police bureau over there. So from 2008 to 2015, over 500 victims of domestic minor sex trafficking were identified. And in terms of how they operated, their goal was always to find trends and the point of sale where people are being sold and how. And originally, they were identifying people on this website you might have heard of before called Backpage, where pretty much all of these people were posted on, more or less. But then the feds eventually took Backpage down, splintered into a million different websites. So pros and cons there, of course. And then many other cities have far exceeded those numbers, being up to 500 per day, being advertised like below age 25, etc. And then this is a picture here. Mike Geiger, so he was actually part of our team at Safety Compass for a while. He's done awesome work with PPB and just like a leader in this movement. as far as the human trafficking task force, which I get to coordinate and co-chair with the DA's office. So it is a group working to create policy, procedure, and protocols around working these cases. So this is a non-comprehensive list of some of the agencies that are on it. The DA's office, Center for Health and Safety, law enforcement, local and federal, DHS, Liberty House, Salem Hospital, Juvenile Department, Safety Homes and other NGOs, Village for One, school district, and then a handful of other agencies. And so we do community outreach, agency trainings, such as this, organized law enforcement efforts, and it's really meant to be a group where whenever one of those agencies identifies someone, that we know who to call and what to do basically, and we all know each other well and know how to navigate that. And so as far as the Marion County statistics, between 2018 and 2023, we had 427 cases, with over half those being minors. Majority, I would say, between ages of like 13 and 17, and then the adults being between the ages of like 18 to 25. And that's not representative of the issue. Those are just the individuals that we came into contact with during that time period.
Well, as you can imagine, it's a very dynamic crime, it's a very dynamic issue to address, and so that's why there is something like a task force that has that many MOU members on it, because they have a dynamic approach, a collaborative approach to addressing it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then as far as regional stats, so Safety Compass operates in Marion, Clackamas, and Washington County. So the statistics are from those three together, between 2018 and 2024, more than 1,400 victims were served, with more than 34,000 supportive contacts. So those are contacts both with the individuals and with other professionals, securing resources, in-person meetings over the phone, all the things.
Even though we only serve those three counties, if there's any nexus to those counties for an individual, we'll work with them. And then additionally, we do technical support to literally anybody that calls on any line.
Yeah. And then as far as kind of the legalities, I know we're not lawyers in the room, but it's helpful to just kind of know what's what. So the crime of promoting prostitution, which would be pimping, trafficking, etc. Here's kind of how it's broken down, and so you can kind of read through that. And it's Class C felony, but essentially it's the facilitation, the setting up the ads, the driving them to the dates, all the things.
I was curious, maybe you'll say it later, so I'm sorry if I'm asking early. I was just curious what the percentage is that of people who are trafficked that are, there you've had a relative that's like taken advantage of them and put them into this situation.
That put them into the situation?
Yeah.
Are you just asking if they were sexually abused in their life and then went in, or are you asking about the percentage of people that are literally trafficked by their family members?
Trafficked by the family members.
Okay. I don't have an exact percentage for you. If I were to give you, kind of a rough estimate just based off of the cases that we've seen, I would say maybe like 20%.
Yeah, that sounds accurate.
Of our cases were, trafficked originally by a family member, and then oftentimes they are trafficked by someone else later on. But that was kind of their early introduction and abuse. So that's a good question.
And depending on the demographic of the people you're talking about, just people who are very housing insecure, you tend to see that more.
Right.
Because they're using whatever they have in their grasp to get their needs met, and often either themselves or their children are part of that thing. So.
If you go back to the prior slide, curious, engages in any conduct that institutes, pays for, facilitates an act of enterprise prostitution. I'm immediately thinking ride-sharing apps and the opportunity of somebody facilitating as arranging a ride share to get.
They would have to benefit financially from the illegal act.
Well, collecting money for the ride, would that not potentially be?
Oh, you're saying the person driving the ride share?
But at the very top it says knowingly.
Yeah.
So if they didn't know what was going on, they're not liable.
If they're knowingly transporting someone to be sold for sex, then they are participating, and yeah, they would lose on prosecution.
Seems like a very gray area, because even in that regard, like, what evidence would constitute the knowingly portion of it? And it could go down a really big route.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a side conversation, just an observation that I made in terms of okay, how potentially vague or how successfully you can argue what that might be or no or not.
I would say just anecdotally that the amount of trafficking cases that we see successfully prosecuted is so small. Like the bar to get that even grand jury is so high, that I understand what you're saying, and I can't like exclusively say no, that never happens, no one's wrongfully prosecuted, but the amount of people that should be prosecuted that aren't is staggering.
Right. Gotcha.
With youth kind of having more access to like VPNs and like access to like OnlyFans, for instance, like platforms like that, has the enforcement of ORS 167 like made it like has that made it more complicated, like, or has the law need to adjust to those kind of circumstances?
yeah. I would say there's still a lot of adjustment happening to all the online exploitation that's happening. And I think oftentimes those are viewed more as like CSAM like child, sexual abuse material, than investigated from like a trafficking side. Like sometimes I've heard like investigators, going down like CSAM investigation route, and then they at some point discover that there's like the trafficking element. But because there definitely are a lot of youth and people that are, being exploited online, and there's a person that is actively forcing them or making them do that, and benefiting from it.
Follow up question to that: is that law able to be enforced on AI images?
At this point, I would probably say no, but I know there's a lot of AI law in the works. We'll see about that. We'll see how that's a whole other conversation, but I'm curious to see how things progress on that side. But yeah, so, and then moving on to compelling prosecution. So this, of course, like the class kind of goes up. So class B felony, it's much more like direct and uses force or intimidation to compel another to engage in prostitution, or reduces the cause of someone under 18, or spouse, child, or stepchild to engage. And then solicitation, of course, is also a crime, but it's a class A misdemeanor. And Clackamas County, there's like a buyer's accountability class, if you're like caught up in a sting or something, but that's the only county that I know that's that. I think Marion and other counties, it's normally a little bit more just like a fine, a little slap on the hand. But a person who commits the crime of commercial sexual solicitation, if a person pays or offers or agrees to pay a fee to engage in sexual contact or conduct or sexual contact. And so, yeah, and of course, when that's a minor, the fine goes up significantly, as far as venues that we see, so this is kind of an overview, a lot of them. So strip clubs, major ones, there's a lot that happens in the back, and then also a lot of people that are profiting off of people actually dancing. Escort sites, dance and nightclubs, trap houses, and brothels, field camps, video poker, and bars. So say in those situations, basically wherever people kind of go to hang out. Like if we're talking about a rural town and there's one bar that everyone hangs out at, and that's they have like video poker room open like 24 hours a day. Like that's where the points of contact like of the name. And casinos, tracks, or like physical roads, if that is their venue of exploitation that they're walking on, that they're for sale on. Like 82nd in Portland, very famous track. Truck stops, city parks, for production sites, and then the internet, as we touched on. And then as far as kind of further breaking that down between like subcultures, which of course these are all demand driven. If there wasn't demand, it wouldn't be an issue. But at the top of the spectrum, we have the legal venues, and then they're also like most lucrative, most high money. Oftentimes, organized crime, people like run those, and then kind of as you go down, this is like less lucrative, less money, but still, significant impact, right? And at the bottom of this list, you have more of the commercial sexual exploitation, so where there's, in your parks and your homeless camps, and with like drug muling, there's not, drug mules, not everyone knows this, but oftentimes they're expected to make like a sexual exchange at the end of the drug exchange as well, so they're being trafficked by labor for, the drug trafficking, but then also sexually. But then, with the other things on the bottom, it's more like, your survival sex and people just trying to get by and people taking advantage of them for that.
No, I don't have the stats in my head right now, but we know that there's a ton of unhoused or housing insecure youth that couch surf. They're not obvious, they're not on campus, they're almost invisible homeless, right? And a ton of them are getting by, are finding a place to sleep by exchanging sex for money straight up. I know in Silverton, I'm from Silverton, so if you remember this number, Silverton has 187 unhoused kids that we don't know where they live. And so we have a lot of concern around their safety, particularly with the training centers, places to go.
Okay, and then as far as movement goes, these are the typical trafficking like networks or circuits that we see. So you look at this, and of course these are your major freeways, right? And as was mentioned, we're on I-5 corridor. We're on what's called the Western Circuit. So same movement that's happening with drugs and guns is also happening with people. And also most victims are domestic. When they go in, they're typically minors again, but we're not typically for sex trafficking seeing people that are like brought out of the country or like across borders, unless on this maybe they're brought down into Mexico at some point, but oftentimes they are people from here, bought and sold by people from here. So that's one thing to take note of. And then, so when we're talking about these different circuits, so we have kind of the Western Circuit, we have the Southern, the Eastern, and then the Midwest belt. And so we normally don't really see those cross over with each other, but if they do, then that's going to tell us that it's a really highly organized, really highly valid situation. Because if a organized crime group is both working in Atlanta and then also over here, they are powerful and have a lot of connections, right? So just as far as how to apply this, when you're talking to someone and you know that maybe they don't really have a stable situation or financial means, or maybe they're a minor, and they start mentioning kind of cities that are along the Western Circuit, that might be a red flag. And you're why were they at these cities? And they might say, oh, I have friends up in Seattle, and oh, I also went to visit a friend in San Francisco, or oh, but Vegas is so cool too. It's gonna raise red flags for me.
We also know that the ones that are traveling across, from seaboard to seaboard, not only is it a higher level of organization, there's also way more money involved. And the more money is involved, the higher the lethality for the people being trafficked. And so we know that if we were to try to get into safe housing, we would need to know oh, you can't go to Atlanta, you can't go to New York. If you have those connections there, you need to go to, Idaho.
somewhere very hidden and rural or something. Yeah. There's one other thing. Oh yeah, I guess too, most of the time we're seeing people traveling by car. But then in those situations it is more common that they're actually getting flights places because there's just so much more money.
And the higher money ones are you have one of those. You have one.
You can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the higher money gals, the higher money people, those are being flown to major national events. Can you guys guess what the biggest sex trafficking event is?
Super Bowl.
There you go. Yeah.
Wow. Really? out of town.
like the next
Oh,
day,
how
when
did you
they're
write that?
gone off the radar.
Why is that?
Because, well, then, like, think about who's attending for one, and then also it's like a big event where people are coming from out of town, they, have extra money to spend, they're away from like family and home life. They're, maybe out with the guys, and let's go like get a hotel room with some girls, like, those kinds of things.
Well, also there's a ton of like really upscale parties following, or during the Super Bowl and following the Super Bowl, and the wealthy hosts are gonna want to provide beautiful girls for their guests to enjoy. And so that's like really, really common.
So are there, I'm sorry to jump ahead.
No.
It was jump ahead, but like, are there security measures that we know that? That seems to be, like, everybody knew that.
When they train flight attendants, they train security at, venues, but beyond that.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I would really disturb it.
Yeah. It is.
What about political conventions? I'm just curious. Are those? I don't know. I'm just.
No, they would never. Not our
No.
I'm not trying to be silly. I was just.
No, it's not silly. I think you have, anytime you have a congregation of lots of people and lots of money, regardless of what the cause or the issue is, I think it's likely that there's going to be a congregation of sex workers and, people being trafficked as well. And so it's not silly. I don't think we track that on political conventions, but.
No, but I mean, there is a lot of, there's data on, buyers, and, buyers are people, across sectors. It's not, one particular, group, but, they have to have disposable, money, right? And, and also, while there are a lot of really, dangerous and narcissistic buyers, there are also, a lot of just very, elite educated buyers on the topic and, not knowing, what they are actually contributing to and the situation of the people they're buying. Not that excuses it, but that is the reality. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, as an innocent bystander, if you're just trying to go enjoy a Super Bowl somewhere, or, you're hanging at the park, you're gonna get into this, but what is, the general public look for to identify this if they're not going into a place where it would be obvious, that's yeah.
So, we'll go into indicators a bit later, so let's hang on to that question. Thanks. Good segue. One more thing with this. Someone does not have to ever leave their own city to be a trafficking victim. People are sometimes trafficked in their own cities, in their own homes. It just is not necessarily gonna be organized crime related then. It might be more street level crime or familial trafficking, things like that. Yeah, so it's important to remember they don't have to be moved at all.
A lot of these look like major trucking routes.
Well, yeah, major it's just major freeways, all throughout the US. All that, this map, so it's like a heat map that is slightly off. We tried to combine two maps. One of them is, the heat map is from Polaris Project, which they have the National Human Trafficking Hotline and all the data from the hotline. So the heat map is based off the number of calls or incidents in an area, but it's slightly off. So if you're why is it in the ocean? That is why.
Right. It's actually more like San Francisco and less on the border.
And then as far as terminology goes, this is not comprehensive, we didn't make these up. These are all just terms within the life. And so traffickers, pimp, daddy, king. The bottom is typically the person, the victim who has the most loyalty to the trafficker. Oftentimes the bottom has maybe kids with their trafficker. They are expected to enforce the rules with the other victims. They're expected to recruit other victims. And so I could go on this whole thing, but it's hard when you think about the criminal side of that, because yes, they are victims, but then also because of their situation, they've had to commit all of these crimes on behalf of their trafficker. So then oftentimes they'll
We also know that bottoms typically receive the worst of physical abuse. Like, they have more enforcement against them than a lot of the other girls in the stable. So it's hard, it's easy to get angry at them, like, how could you do this if this happened to you? That's why.
And then, yeah, so as I said, like the stable or like family, that's, you know, everyone's kind of owned together, it's the whole group. And then like the people within the stable are referred to as like the sister wives, like people being exploited together, wifey, wife-in-laws. The life is kind of a broader term, for it could be directly referring to, you know, being trafficked or being, you know, in the commercial sex industry, or it could be like the broader, just like world of organized crime, whereas the game is exclusively like the sex industry. But you'll hear those terms kind of like interchangeably. And then the trap, Blade already kind of covered that, so physical street people on the sale floor, or yeah. And then rules of the game. The unfortunate part of this, I mean, all of this is unfortunate, but there are literal like books and YouTube channels that pimps learn how to pimp on, and they have rules that are just kind of like blanket across the U.S. in particular. And some of those rules are like no being out of pocket, which means like no being disrespectful, meeting your quota, etc. No reckless eyeballing, like you can't look another male aside from your trafficker like in the eye. No choosing up. You can't just like go with another pimp because he has more money, he's nice or whatever. And then all the money, you don't get to keep anything you make. And then dates are sexual exchanges, roses, the amount of money it costs, and then in-call or out-calls, whether you're going out to buy or they're coming into you.
Also, some of this language like has gotten really absorbed into like pop culture, movies, songs, and like so you hear a lot of this stuff that it originated from the sex industry and now it's just kind of commonly thrown around, which is a little gross, but yeah, so you see this a lot.
Exactly. And then as far as talking about pimps, pimps are traffickers. They will often say they're money managers, they're entrepreneurs, they're you know, businessmen in the music industry, they're rappers, they're whatever else they want to call themselves. But they're money stealers. They keep all the money, and they say that they offer street level protection for the individuals they exploit, but in reality, they don't protect them from harm. They do a whole lot of harm to the people that they're trafficking. What's your question?
Because I noticed, like, with some of the juvenile departments that I work with, especially with trafficked individuals, like, we'll call pimps traffickers, but, like, is there a reason why that terminology, like instead of just calling them a pimp? Because I feel like that word, people kind of know what that means when we say trafficker, it seems a little bit kind of distant.
I would say it's the same reason that we use the term CSAM instead of child porn. Because you like CSAM is child sexual abuse material. Because you are highlighting the fact that is abuse of a minor, and in the same way, like trafficking is crime and something that people know is bad and that is hurtful, but like the word pimp has been just like so glorified and you know it's thrown around in media. Like pimps are kind of like this caricature, like this like cool person with all this money and like you know maybe like a young man would like want to be because of how it's portrayed in media. Right.
So it's worth noting when we're talking to participants, when we're talking to kids in the juvenile department, we're talking to you know someone who has potentially been exploited. We don't use the word trafficker. We would like when we're interviewing them, that would be not helpful, but it wouldn't be at all. So we use fairly elusive language. We'll also refer to them as a boyfriend or you know somebody who takes care of your money. Like we'll ask questions that can lead around to the term for us trafficking, but not with them.
No, thank you for that. I appreciate the explanation. I was a little confused.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. But yeah, I think that's really like important to highlight too. Like the language we use with like professionals is so different than the language we're going to be using with potential victims. So we can talk about that more later. So going into the life, like I said, it's too close to home. Our caseloads are primarily domestic minors. Yeah, it's not been brought to Mexico or to some other country.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about like what your caseload looks like, or like what does that mean to have a caseload? What are you doing on a daily basis to like intervene?
I'll also.
If that's a later, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Okay.
No, all really good questions. And I guess too, one thing that I should have said at the very beginning, if you guys are like, I have no idea what Safety Compass is. So Safety Compass is a community-based advocacy agency for survivors of commercial sexual exploitation up to the age of 25, regardless of whether they're in the life or not. And yeah, the primary focus is crisis response, but there's also like ongoing case management, and then once they're in a stable place, community. But yeah, so that's kind of the general overview. And being community-based advocates, I don't know if in these slides I have the differentiation between, like, I don't know how familiar you are with like systems-based advocate versus community-based. Your systems-based advocates, those are like your sexual assault advocates with the DA's office, per se. And like their involvement is completely tied to like the court case or involvement in the criminal justice system. Community-based advocate, we have highest level of confidentiality, and like our involvement is not at all tied to like the system whatsoever.
So like, we're not mandated reporters, we're kind of the opposite, we can be subpoenaed, we have a very high level of privilege.
And yeah, but we'll talk a lot more about that later. So who is exploited? Again, they're normally brought in as a minor, and we know that the sex industry does discriminate because it's demand driven, right? There's typically a prior history of child sexual abuse. They're experiencing an episode of risk or vulnerability, or maybe they've just had a lifetime of risks and vulnerabilities. 68%, like I said, victims have a history of child welfare involvement, and they're often recruited or groomed by pimps while runaways or homeless, or in other ways just kind of already displaced. As far as recruitment tactics go, so the most common that we see is romance, which is coercion. I would say like we do see that mostly, but we're gradually seeing more like kind of by like force or kind of it's like your Romeo pimps versus your gorilla pimps versus like the finesser. There's like all these different kinds of pimps, right? But Romeo pimps are normally like I would say they're most common. And so you have the legal terms beside these, right? And then you have your like fake modeling agencies, where it's like, oh, you're so beautiful. Have you ever thought about modeling? Oh, here's my car. You just have to, we're just doing headshots. Meet us at this hotel. And then when they show up, it's like, oh, actually, you just missed the headshots. But we're doing lingerie now, and you can make more money if you want to do that. And then, and so on. Or they show up and they're just immediately sexually assaulted, and that's recorded, and that's used against them. So that, whole thing. And then also music recording, just a similar thing of like, hey, like, have you ever thought about, recording your music and some that, and then show up, they're, isolated, assaulted, and so on, or there's this whole process of fraud and coercion within there. Here's your porn stars and movie stars, where all of those elements are present in these situations. You have the sexing, which is basically a gang rape, but it is being jumped in for females. So in order to be a part of a gang as a female, this is often what happens, and then they're just put in the industry. There aren't many roles for females in gangs. You have the friend or peer who has like a cool job opportunity and lots of nice things, and it's like, oh, I'll just introduce you to my friend, you'll make so much money, so on.
And that's where the bottom comes in. That's where you see bottoms. And if they're required to do it, that's how they can have any freedom at home, so yeah.
And we know that, again, this is like the sex industry itself, the life is really glorified by media, but the reality is all of these things, frequent sexual assault, really sadistic physical assault, both by pimps and by the tricks, verbal abuse, torture, deprivation, isolation, forced and coerced drug use, displacement, dehumanization, and oftentimes trafficking cases present initially as other crimes. So, you know, it might appear just as like a drug overdose or an isolated sexual assault or domestic violence situation, or there's, you know, a homicide. And once you ask more questions, then you might eventually learn that it is actually a trafficking situation, but it can just initially appear as so many different things, and people are not going to straight up tell you, you know, the broader context, right? As far as the trajectory of exploitation, there's initially, of course, the recruitment or grooming stage, where they are desensitized to the sex industry, subculture, and, you know, maybe this was like, you know, bringing them to clubs or making them watch porn or, you know, slowly pushing their boundaries. And then there's manufactured bonding and just boundary blurring, induced dependency. And this is like a gradual thing, right? People would not be brought in. They would immediately seek help or leave if they knew what was happening to them. But it's a really like gradual and very intentional process.
And age dependent.
Yeah.
The grooming definitely looks
Exactly.
different depending if someone's grooming a 12-year-old, it's gonna look different than if they're grooming like an 18 or 19-year-old. So,
Exactly. And then there's some kind of breaking stage, where there's forced fraud or coercion. This is when they, by whatever means, are put in the life, and then they experience overwhelming trauma, shame, guilt, and they're already isolated from people, and then there are, you know, all of those impacts prevent people from speaking up in addition to all the other factors. And then it eventually gets to the stage where they're in maintenance, which means they're just going about their day-to-day, trying to survive, doing what they have to do, meeting their quotas. They don't think there's anything else they can do, that there's any help, and they are just getting by. And then eventually they're in automatic, where they don't have to be supervised by their trafficker. There's fear-induced compliance, cultural pressure, family secrets, loyalty, plus trauma bonds, so many other things at play here.
by the time they get to that stage too, there's a lot of disassociation going on. Like at that point, their mental health's very much deteriorated for the most part, and they're only able to survive their situation by normalizing what's happening to them. Otherwise, they would. That's why you see a ton of addiction, a ton of suicidality, and things like that in those people.
Yeah, and like an example too of like what this looks like is even when, say where events that a trafficker is prosecuted, goes to prison, you'll still see the victim putting money on their books, right? Because in their mind, they're like, well, they're gonna get out eventually, or they're getting jail calls still, there's, all these things at play, plus maybe there's people on the outside that are going to, enforce everything if they don't comply. So, and it's all just normalized by them because you have to in order to get by. So going back to the romance side of things and coercion. So the myth in those situations is, if you love me, you would do this for me, and if you don't, I'll leave you. So the person with less power, the victim, is, they're involved in dancing, webcam porn, sex acts for money to aid the couple. It's all to appease the partner in an attempt to secure their admiration and love. For them, it's all about the relationship. Whereas the person with more power knows exactly what they're doing. They coerce the other person to do things they're not comfortable with for money, and it's all about the money. So you're always going to have this imbalance, and it's never going to be stable, right? And then when we're thinking more about, say, your like gorilla pimps, or your really violent gang members who are running people, that the victim might view that violent gang member as their boyfriend or their partner or whatever. But the myth of power as protection. So maybe they, were victimized or abused a lot of their life. They felt really powerless. They were never helped, quote unquote, like by the system or anyone they sought help from. So in their mind, it's like association of power equals protection and a better life. So sure, they're violent, but that means they will keep me safe. I have more power by association to them.
We worked with a little gal in Portland, and her trafficker had been arrested, and they were trying to get her to roll on and get some disclosures to help the case out. And one of the other people we work with, like, literally put his rap sheet down in front of him, like, look at the crime this man has committed, like, why are you protecting him? He's harmed so many people. And she said was very typical of the people we work with. She said, well, I've lived with violence my entire life. Like, that's no different than anything he's so bad, he's so violent, like, maybe he actually can be the one that protect me.
So then going back to online venues, either used for recruitment and or solicitation. So this is, again, not a comprehensive list, but a lot of the big ones we've historically seen. I would add to, like, we're seeing a lot of minors also recruited off of like Roblox or Discord, Minecraft. Exactly. And so, I mean, it's really anywhere that youth are on, like they're being recruited from. And then, a lot of these are actually websites where like ads are posted on. Oh, I guess also, I forgot, that reminds me. So I need to add to the venues slide, the earlier one, not online venues, but so massage parlors are, illicit massage businesses. That is a huge scale problem here in the US, and the victims are both sex and labor trafficked. It's really highly organized. They're mostly, or pretty much entirely, like foreign victims who are brought here with promises of other jobs, of another life, better life. But then, they are being, forced to provide like sexual services in all these parlors, and it's very, very high level. And there are thousands of them throughout the U.S.
There's 7 in the Salem, isn't that
So I know there are 30 in Marion County, about 30 in Marion County, that we are like advertised online, and then.
And these guys don't go the traditional like I-5 corridor route. They're hopped about once a month. They move parlors, and they're hopped all over the United States. They're very hard. They usually don't speak the language. They're very isolated. They don't know how to make connections, and so it's very hard to help them or prosecute people who are moving them because it's international. It's a lot more organized.
The victim moves like once a month or every few weeks. They don't know like what city they're in like half the time.
I noticed first they shut down Backpage.
Yes.
It's still up there, one Backpage, yes Backpage. So all they've done is they just.
They splintered it into 1,000
Exactly.
packages. Yeah, so that was an unforeseen and unfortunate consequence.
They shut down one, 6 more pop up.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like even with the like illicit massage businesses we're talking about, like it's the same thing. Every time one gets shut down, like more just pop up, and that's one of the hard things.
It's pushing it more and more underground.
Yeah. So
How do you know? Like if you're, I'm sorry. Like how do you know if this is happening and you think that you're supporting this business, but you don't want to support
So that like they don't look like reputable businesses. Like they will have like very stock photos.
I mean, I guarantee you that you've all driven past them. You've definitely driven past them. And like now that I like know what they look like, I'm just like so aware that they're just all around me all the time.
Wow.
They all have the same like advertising, same like clip art images basically, like the signs all look the same. Like they normally are open pretty late, all of their windows are like covered and they have like the same posters on a lot of these
Can you give like an example, like how, what business that's been around that's been?
There's one on Hawthorne, there's one on,
Pretty much
right by
every-
the Ramada Inn.
Like anytime you just see one of those red signs, normally red, that says massage in big letters, no other info, that's like an illicit massage business. Like pretty much guaranteed.
So what are you looking for when you enter into a business to see that it's a legitimate business? Are you looking for a certification? Are you looking for, are the workers, is it ever appropriate to ask direct questions, like?
Yeah, so, I mean, we don't go in directly, but like the Oregon Massage Licensing Board, like if they get tips, they'll like go in and check for licenses, and then also, like there are, like the U.S. Attorney's Office is like very well, versed in this area, and they, you know, can cover people, HSI, they're very involved. So I would just like report like to law enforcement basically, and then, you know, it's normally through a compilation of reports and then also like seeing things online that they eventually will add that to the menu that they were investigating.
But as far as identify, like if you walk into a massage parlor and there was nobody sitting at the front desk maybe, or, I'm trying to think, like the last time I went got a massage, it's usually like plants and goldfish and little things and music, and like if there's something that is really setting the tone. Also the prices are usually very cheap at these massage parlors, or cheaper than, I mean, you know,
A lot of them are like cash only too, or at least you have to, you know, you can only tip with cash, but a lot of them just are cash only. But like if there's, like, it's nothing that says like therapeutic and it doesn't look like therapeutic, like, and it just says like foot reflexology, or just like generally like massage.
Yeah. Also, they either don't have a website, or if they do have a website, it's super janky, and you can't make appointments online, and like, it just doesn't seem legit.
Yeah.
What was your?
I was just gonna say, like, I've had massages and I have to sign something that says if there's anything inappropriate that happens during this massage, it's terminated immediately. So like, that was refreshing.
Yeah. That's good to hear. Yeah.
If we know that there's say 30 of these places here that have been identified, why not expose them and then just stop it?
Yeah. So it is, because it is like so highly organized and there's like so many like layers, it's a lot harder to actually get to the root of the issue. It's not like, you know, for one, we would never, like, luckily Marion County does not arrest anyone for prostitution, but, you know, like, there are situations where, you know, law enforcement has, like, gone into, like, an illicit massage parlor and arrested victims, and, you know, the place got shut down, sure, but then, you know, those victims, once, like, they're not gonna go to court, they're just gonna be moved to another, location, so it's like, you have to actually find the people running it, and like, that happens largely through actually, like, financial investigations, and, you know, the long game, basically.
That's what I was gonna say, that usually once you find out about them and you go to shut them down, they're already busy opening up another place in another spot.
Yeah, it's definitely whack-a-mole, and to really prosecute even the lower level people that are running a more local parlors, like, you have to get disclosures from the women, most of the women only speak Mandarin, and so the police put them up in a hotel room to tell them we're gonna come interview you tomorrow. The trafficker goes to the hotel room, picks them up, and they're out. They're on their way to Atlanta, or on their way to New York, or whatever. That's their restaurant.
I'm wondering if we've seen any correlation, because I see the websites we have on here, the moderators, a couple of them. Again, just the society in the last 60 years, like with the sex positive movement, we've seen kind of that maybe kind of sway younger generations, for instance, like the Gen Z that's kind of entering the workforce, to like these kind of really just this kind of work per se. Like, is there a correlation there?
I mean, I think there's definitely, like, glamorization, just as we talked about, just like of the life, and because of how it's portrayed, it's like, oh, this is like fast money, or like, oh, I can just do this, but then, like, again, in the situations we're talking about, they're not keeping their money. They're being taken advantage of, and they're forced, you etc. But again, like we'll work with anyone in the life, like irrelevant of what that exactly means or looks like for them.
Well, I think what the glamorization that the whole sex industry really misses is how much violence is involved.
Yeah.
And so because people that are like thinking that someone will be fine, they don't realize it's not just violence from the traffickers, it's violence from the tricks as well. There's violence from the dates as well. Like that happens all the time. And so, and I mean, even talking with girls that say what they should, they want to stay in the life. I've never met one that wasn't deeply affected by complex trauma. And so I think that the sex positive movement kind of misses that piece.
Thank you.
Okay.
I had a question. I've seen like things online or like parents that make TikTok videos of their children doing things that are not necessarily inappropriate, but it can be viewed inappropriately, and they make a lot of money because their children are doing slightly inappropriate things or saying certain kind of could be inappropriate things. Like, do the police see that and watch that? Because there are like certain bigger people, like parents, that make a lot of money off their children from doing these things, and I see like we know what they're doing, but they're not really getting in trouble for it because they're not inherently doing anything bad, I guess. That's like another, like their parents are operating off their children by having them doing certain things.
Right. I would probably say that's like a fine line, right? Before it would be necessarily get law enforcement's attention or like be warranted for like an investigation, but like, I mean,
I mean, I think all larger police departments have like a CCM unit, or, cops that are just, that's their whole thing, is going through online platforms, going through all of that, trying to find child abuse, child pornography or whatever when they find it. I think that the volume of stuff that they have to go through is so huge that unless it really rises to like absolutely this is child abuse, we can prosecute, probably they're not gonna do anything about that because they're trying to like take care of the really dangerous situations that are like really actually sexually exploitative situations. That's not gonna rise to that level. Unless we have thousands more cops.
Yeah, good question though. So moving into the how this impacts people psychologically, understanding the trauma. So this is kind of the trajectory that we tend to see. So initially there's just like the befriending as part of the initial recruitment, grooming. There's then manufactured bonding via narcissistic abuse. It is the cycle of interpersonal violence, which is pretty similar to like the cycle of domestic violence, if you're familiar with that wheel. They're next going to probably get to a point of having complex PTSD. And then Stockholm Syndrome is also something that plays a big role because they have all these strong bonds and attachments to this person that is hurting them deeply. But psychologically, they are so bonded to this person, which is part of why it's so hard to get victims to, it's so uncommon for victims to report.
Well, and you think that we sometimes use the evictions model when we're talking about this because like they have been so isolated from most of their other social structures that the only way they really get that dopamine hit of interpersonal communication, interpersonal bonding is by talking to their trafficker, even if it's abusive. And so even if it's abuse, they want the attention because they need that dopamine hit.
And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So as far as the early stages, it oftentimes is kind of narcissistic love bombing. So they meet the future victim, they shower them with attention, compliments, quality time. And again, when we're thinking of maybe, youth that are in the system, who have had unstable relationships, haven't always felt loved or cared for, to suddenly have this person shower so much attention on them and really speak to those vulnerabilities, like that feels amazing initially, right? And then there's generally, the pushing of boundaries. So they push for really fast-paced intimacy, banking on the rule of reciprocity to manufacture that bond with them. And then once the bond's secure, then there's some kind of compromising situation that will very intentionally arise. So, for example, they're talking every day, texting every day, and they're getting them maybe initially to like send them like new photos and saying you're so beautiful, blah blah blah. And then there will be like something of that is totally made up of like you did this. You're like in the wrong, and then they'll got all of that attention, everything there, it's just suddenly gone. And so then, like emotionally, then what happens is the hook is set. So there's this huge void that's been left, and so then the victim is suddenly seeking out the person who is trying to abuse them. And so they, question the alteration of communication. They want to resolve it. Like, I'll do anything, just please come back to me. And then that gives all of the power to the narcissist. And then, like I said, so it follows the domestic violence cycle of abuse. So, there's normal behavior, and, then there's this whole fantasy state, then there's some kind of setup that happens, then the abuse occurs, and then it's like, oh, I'm so sorry, you just made me so mad, whatever, and it'll never happen again, and then, and so on, around. And then when we're thinking about, like, how significant this is, so, healthy relationship pattern, if you think about, like, the highest point in a relationship that was important to you, maybe like that high point was like, we got married, or like we had a kid, or like something like that. And then like the lowest day was like, oh, we got in a pretty bad fight. Like, yeah, like it sucked. It was hurtful, but like that is like, that's good. But then when we're talking about the unhealthy relationship pattern between like a pimp and a victim, like it is way more turbulent, and like the extremes are so different, because the abuse, the bottom, the worst day might be like, he threatened to kill me and he held a gun to my head. Whereas then like the best day, like a small kindness, he bought me a cheeseburger. That might feel like the best thing in the world, in contrast to the daily abuse and violence that they see. And so that keeps people going in a sense, just like these little small kindnesses that makes them think, oh, like they do care about me. Like maybe this isn't so bad, but it's always going to continue on that.
Well, and remember we talked about normalization and how they were keeping themselves alive, basically, through normalizing that kind of abuse. And so if you think that you're normalizing that level of abuse, think about what it's got to take for someone to actually be their trafficker, or to actually want to prosecute. Like, if you're normalizing having a gun held to your head and, getting beat up, it has to be so dangerous and so over the top to get somebody to the point where they're like, okay, now I'm ready to go.
This follows mixed interval ratio reinforcement scheduling, which again, like this is all so intentional by the abusers. They know exactly what they're doing. There are literal playbooks out there, but it is the same techniques that are used for slot machines. So it's reward-induced behavior modification, where the reward system is skewed in an environment with extreme violence and deprivation. And like I said, those small kindnesses create reward pathways in the brain. So dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline, those become the drugs of choice. And then there's also the addiction to the attachment with them, with oxytocin and vasopressin.
If anybody's wondering, one of the most common playbooks for pimps is literally called the Pimp Bible, which I think is hilarious.
Okay, and then, so when the trauma occurs, so we know that happens, it's stored in our brains and our bodies when we perceive we can never we can neither flee nor flight, and our self-protective mechanisms become intensified and disorganized, and they continue to exist in extreme form long after the danger is over. So, you have acute trauma where it's like a single instance, maybe someone is, in a car accident, and then, they're experiencing like PTSD or nightmares, flashbacks, like for a period of time after that, but then it does not present at all in the same way as someone who experiences complex PTSD, who for over an extended period of time, they're experiencing trauma, and they perceive they can either flee or fight. And so then you're going to have chronic limbic system arousal, and fight, flight, freeze responses become your dominant neural pathways. And it's extremely destructive to attachments and identity formation, so just overall sense of self. And people stay in just fight, flight, freeze perpetually. They're just trying to survive when they're in that state.
And when you see that, that makes intervention also very challenging, because they might get exposed to safety compass or whatever. And because they're stuck in these dominant pathways, they're not going to be able to make a healthy relationship with somebody who wants to be helpful. They're not going to be able to, they're going to tend to want to flee or fight anybody that's having interaction with them. It can be very hard, even when help is presented, to be able to access and accept that help.
Yeah.
I really appreciate y'all saying that. Some of the victims that I have worked with, when they've entered normal relationships, they would express that, like, compared to the other relationships, it's boring, and then they end up kind of going back to those kind of older.
Right. It's really hard to break those neural pathways. Takes a lot of intentional time, relationship, and healthy relationship, and healing. Right.
Is that one of the biggest reasons that we see kids from foster care falling into this as well, is because they've already experienced that complex trauma to begin with?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so this is already.
Those pathways are established already, exactly.
Yeah. And one kind of easy way to visualize one piece of this too is that complex trauma makes it so the smoke alarms in our brains don't work anymore. So you don't know really what is safe versus what is not safe, and you're just chronically aroused, and everything either sometimes things that are totally unsafe seem totally fine, and then things that are truly safe feel really scary.
Well, I mean, you see a ton of self-medication, because they are constantly caught up in the fight or flight. Anything to bring them back down, to make them feel normal. You see a ton of drug use because of that.
Right. And then the long-term implication of complex trauma in this situation again is we often see Stockholm syndrome. And when you perceive you can either flee, fight, or freeze, then the only thing that you have control over is psychological. So it's your thoughts, right? And so that's where, as we talked about before, people might tell you, no, I choose this, I want to do this, because they don't believe that they can do anything else. They think that that is where they are stuck and destined to be, And so same thing with relationally too. It's a lot easier to say I want to be where I am than that I'm a victim, right? And so it leads us to maintenance and befriend. If you can't be them, join them. And then, while the trafficker maintains control through fear and so many other avenues, the victim's just going to try to continue to appease them. And then we're thinking of the severity. So thinking about if a child enters the commercial sex industry at the age of 13, and they're sold 5 times a day, 5 days per week for 5 years, that child has been raped 6,000 times by the time they enter the legal age of the sex industry, and they're now eligible for arrest. Wow. And those days, hours, that's a normal work week, right? But those hours are not applicable to this. So again, we're thinking about the impact and the trauma this is so significant. So I know that's hard to take in, but I think it's impactful and it's important to think about. So as far as getting back to indicators of possible commercial sexual exploitation, here is a very non-comprehensive list of indicators. So some that we see are maybe more than one cell phones, maybe they have like a trap phone, secret social media pages, often with an alias, highly sexualized attire that doesn't match the weather or season or activity, again, repeated runaways from home. We know that by the fourth run that nearly 100% of youth have been commercially sexually exploited because they don't have a means to survive otherwise. We know that, if someone's self-care per se doesn't match their financial means, and it's like something that's new and, maybe again we're talking about like a 16 or 17-year-old unhoused kid or a kid that's on the run, or someone who just doesn't really have a job or finances, but they have their hair done, they have their nails done, their lashes, like all these things that cost a lot of money, like where is that coming from? Also, why is that priority if you don't have finances? And then a new partner whose appearance in their life coincides with other people on the list, often not someone they go to school with or knew previously. Gang affiliation, especially for female identifying individuals, that we have interacted with males who have been affiliated, who've been exploited in this way as well. If they return home after being unaccounted for or running away, have cash on them, hotel room keys, adult pornographic images on social media with reference to being property of, getting married, they're using any of the other kind of industry-specific language, or there's a ton of emojis too, but a lot of these terms are all on like Urban Dictionary. They're all out there.
So also, like Chris said, this is not comprehensive, and I think if you see any one of these in conjunction with just a change in behaviors, like angry outbursts, getting in fights at school, substance use that was atypical previously, any of that is going to be kind of like, maybe something's going on. And then also cash apps, which all kids have cash apps these days. But if they have a cash app that's really, really full and they don't have a job, that should be at least kind of a little question mark.
Are there more questions about like indicators or get the exact yeah?
What emojis?
Yeah.
Oh, so they're like obviously bad.
I mean, if you don't know, you don't know. But I would honestly say probably most youth know a lot of them.
Because I work with youth on my caseload, and so I guess that's why I'm curious to know.
Right. And like I think I guess a really obvious one would be like if you're like looking at someone's like Instagram and they have maybe like a plane and a heel, so they're traveling or they're maybe like new in town and they are for sale, like they're in the life is the heel.
There's the crowns, like the king, queen crown. That's a good one. I think everybody knows the eggplant, right? What are other ones?
The little like umbrella frame, condom, like there's like so many.
The emojis are very regional. The emojis used here in the Pacific Northwest are not the same used in Los Angeles, SoCal area, vice versa. If you were to go follow those map areas, so I would be careful with that because it is regional, especially with gang affiliation is in there. You're going to see them avoid certain colors. You're going to see them avoid certain symbols on purpose. So I would be careful with that just because it's more of a regional thing.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair point. And part of why I think the emojis can be like a little bit more like law enforcement specific. They're not like necessarily as helpful to share like broadly, but then also like I would say as far as like ads go, we do see like pretty consistent like emojis like used in afterlife sex ads.
Well, when we're looking at ads, we are being regional. Like we're talking about stings, we're talking about like doing something effective, and so but we can still utilize them in very regional operations.
Oh
from a preventative approach, wouldn't it be helpful for the general public to have access to these things? To look for certain symbols and things?
You're playing whack-a-mole again.
Yeah, exactly.
Right now, they at least know.
Yeah, okay.
So as soon as it's public knowledge, now they gotta figure it out, or they're creating more work for themselves.
I appreciate you saying that. Like, I think that is one thing of like sometimes when we have like trainings that are say, like, specific for law enforcement, like other people are like, well, like I want to go, like that sounds cool, but like as soon as that's public information, then like it's not going to be useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guess I was never good for that. Never know the secret.
Maybe you never yeah.
I was curious, what connection, if any, there is to the adult shops that they are, all over the place. I'm originally from Southern California, and I mean, they usually have like one or two in it, in Pasadena or something like that. Here, they've got, it says adult shop, and it's got all that stuff, so it seems like it's really concealed from, so they really wouldn't let, anything happen, but I was just wondering if there is any connection.
Oftentimes tracks are like really close to adult shops. Like if you see like an area where there's like an adult shop and like a motel and a strip club, you have found a track. So those things very, very often are kind of all next to each other.
It's very lovely right now.
I was wondering, and thanks for that question, because I think that was really interesting. But you had mentioned a lottery in bars. What is the significance of the lottery?
Yeah, I mean, just because it's like a 24-hour, like really late location, and just where like potential buyers are hanging out. So it might be where like an initial interaction like takes place.
The old miners watching the bar at midnight.
The miners allowed to bar.
That's not what we're
Well, sometimes they have keys. They oftentimes are lying about their age. Like, yeah, very commonly like go by an alias or.
Well, and if the purveyor of the bar is involved in the capital, like strip clubs and things like that, that's what they are. They're not going to enforce the legal age limit, especially for girls. So, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, dealing in an exchange where it's predominantly cash only as well.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
having a barter wants to keep the cash available in the moment. Allows for a little bit more.
Yeah, strip clubs are fantastic money laundering places.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And casinos.
And casinos. Yeah. Also, fun little fact, when there's a large amount of, what is it, ATMs,
Of the like crypto.
like crypto ATMs, when you see a large amount of crypto ATMs concentrated in one area, you have a lot of organized crime and a lot of human trafficking going on. So I found
Really?
some fun
Huh.
little facts.
That's the original primary use case.
And then this may or may not be relevant to you in your position, but so we have interstate compact on juveniles in Oregon and well throughout the U.S. So it's a multi-state agreement that provides like basically procedural means for juveniles who either have run from home or placed on probation or parole and wants to reside in another state. Maybe they absconded from probation or parole. They require institutional care or special services in another state, or they have like pending court proceedings and they run to another state. So when we come across youth or law enforcement or whoever else calls us, they come across this runaway youth who's from another state, we enact interstate compact, which is the process to get that youth back to their home state. And it is very formal, and there's, like the point of contact for Oregon is Mina. She's awesome. Like, if you ever have a runaway youth that you need help figuring out what to do with, she's the person to call, and also call us. As far as intervention goes, so we've learned about the dynamics of the sex industry and trafficking. We've discussed the impact of trauma. So now from your role, how do you intervene? How do you get victims safe and help them seek justice? So one thing we'll know is rapport trumps everything. so, no matter who you're working with, whether it's someone who's been victimized in this way or someone else, rapport trumps everything. Relationship, as was touched on before. And so we utilize the stages of change model, which this is really common in like the drug and alcohol recovery world. That's where it came from. But in our world, so people cycle through all the different phases of this, but pre-contemplation is much more you're going to be hearing like, no, like I choose this, like, you're stupid, you exist free, I don't need help, whatever. Contemplation is going to be like, yeah, like I make all this money, but like I can't afford my own place, or I, still can't afford to eat. Because obviously they're not really keeping up for keeping their money, right? Preparation is being like, maybe there are actually other options. Maybe I can do something different. Maybe I can get out away from this person. Action, when someone's in action, typically something really significant just happened. They like maybe like when we're talking about that like scale, like worst day to best day, like they might have just experienced like the worst day. And so they're like, I want out, I want to report, like whatever it takes. And we're gonna be like all hands on deck. But that lasts a really short period of time. Like it's typically like 4 to 12, 4 hours or like 12 maximum. So if someone's telling us those things, like we're gonna be doing everything we can. If they say they want to report, like we're gonna call up a detective, have them there like ASAP. We're going to be calling all our confidential like emergency housing locations, or if necessary, trying to relocate them like across state or across like the country. We're gonna be maybe getting them into inpatient or whatever else is needed to get them safe in that moment. And we have to act fast because they will quickly fall somewhere else along this continuum. And then,
so that's why rapport is so incredibly important, because if they remember they're isolated, that's how their trafficking controls was through isolation. And so if they don't have that person that they have rapport with, they will cycle out of action stage so quickly that nothing will happen. So you have to have that rapport, you have to be that person, or there has to be somebody that they feel like, yes, I can trust this person enough to go and make this action stage.
It's a framework for assessing readiness for disclosure. And so it's really useful in, just knowing what resources are actually helpful in that moment and how to best work with that person. And so though we are, confidential, and maybe this person has not signed any ROIs, so, we are not able to share anything with any of the other people involved. But we could, maybe say, like, to the detective who wants to interview them, hey, like, I think that they are currently in contemplation. Like, they're not in that place. Or we could say, hey, like, they're in action. But, like, if they're in action, they're going to be signing an ROI. But, like, it kind of just gives guidance in how to work with them. And then additional creative rapport building techniques. So these can be used with anyone, especially people who have experienced trauma. But so if you notice that like someone is really anxious, you can kind of move like the tension to elicit disclosure. Like use like fidget tools, like give them something to do with their hands. Like if you like one example too is not putting like all of your energy on them. So if they are just kind of like fidgety or seem like kind of removed from you or stressed, you like position your body away from them and you're not like staring them directly in the face. That's going to help like relieve a lot of that tension. And then mirroring can be really helpful too, like if they're using sarcasm, like use a little sarcasm back, or if humor is their coping mechanism, like use a little humor with them. And then if they're like minimizing, like it is not your place to say like, oh my gosh, no, that's actually horrible. Like their minimization is how they're surviving. So use the same language and just read them, and try to reduce the tension as much as possible. And then, so as far as just general trauma-informed response, safety planning with every contact we make with someone. We're always using harm reduction planning, and trying to screen the shelter if possible. Expect a wide variety of trauma responses to be recurring. Everyone kind of, copes differently. Don't do things personally. It's not personal. Look to a hierarchy of needs to guide you in supporting survivors, and see all coping as a sign of strength. So again, when we're thinking about hierarchy of needs, we apply that directly to safety planning. So first off, person's psychological needs have to be met before anything else can really be thought of. So, do they have food, shelter, somewhere to sleep, clothing? Do they have immediate medical needs? And then, safety needs, personal security, employment resources, health, property. And then once they have those two things, then maybe they can start to, build better relationships or friendships, have a sense of connection to other people, and then we're going up to maybe esteem, a sense of respect, status, recognition, strength, freedom, before they can actually reach self-actualization. But you have to go from the bottom on this. You can't, start at the top, right? So our goals for safety, though, might not coincide with their view of what their needs are. And I think that's one thing for, professionals to always think about is are my goals in line with their goals? And how can we bridge that gap, right? And then basic needs over long-term treatment and harm reduction. So, then of course, we all have our own biases and backgrounds, so just, check yourself and be aware of what those might be. And then how specialized advocates can assist in non-traditional ways. So, safety compasses, sex trafficking specific advocates can be a wealth of information regarding the subculture, language, just how to best interact and engage with these victims. They can, alert investigation teams to changes in the stage of change, can assist with pre and post testimony crisis intervention that's unique to this population. And ultimately our goal is to be super collaborative and be a bridge back to the system. We don't want to silo people. That is not beneficial to them. So we work really hard to get ROIs, to get people connected to resources, and hopefully build up trust that they've lost through their previous experiences.
And I can take yours.
Yes. I think it's a long time.
We're very patient.
Yes.
We'll do it for a really long time.
Exactly. So again, this kind of just goes over a lot of what I just said. Well, one big thing, going along with what Steph just said, is the long-term consistent navigational support. So most of the time, the people we are interacting with, they take a long time to really get connected to resources, to think about, disclosing what's happened to them to someone else. And so and they'll go back and forth between stages of change, and we work with lots of kiddos who we work with for a period of time, and then they go on a run, they're missing for months, and then you get a call from an officer or DHS or someone. You're like, okay, they're back, so we're free to engage with them, try to get them what they need, and then maybe they disappear again for a period of time. That can go on for years.
But showing that consistency and showing back up in their life when they're back, that is what actually builds that real rapport and that real bond. That's how you ultimately can come back around to making disclosures to law enforcement or whatever, when they're seeing that you have good boundaries, you have basically unconditional love for them in their situation. That will move that needle when they're seeing how destructive their relationship with their trafficker is. That's what brings them back around to disclosure.
And then, understanding of Stockholm syndrome, complex trauma, coping skills, and just power and control dynamics related to the life, and again, just all the things that we've kind of gone over. So have a quick little video here from
survivors. Here we go. Oh, do we
What
have
happened,
audio?
and I don't know where it ends up, where I end up. I'm like, how do you start a book when you don't know where the ending is?
I was raised in the house of my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my aunts. So when I say I don't exactly know when it started, I was actually born in it.
I think that my story is still evolving. I used to think my beginning was when I met my pimp, but really my beginning was before that, in different things that happened to me in my life growing up. I'm still healing even 3 years later, and I think it will always be a part of me.
My main focus now is just getting all the way away from there. I still live in the same city, so everybody still knows me as that. So like when I go out and I see people, they still remember me as that Jasmine, and I'm a completely different Jasmine now.
Me siento muy bien, porque entre más hablo, me libero más. Aunque ya me siento que estoy liberada, porque ya estoy en libertad, ¿no?
I call myself a survivor because circumstances that were out of my control, they didn't stop me from growing. They didn't stop my voice. I call myself a survivor because I can tell my story.
Mi sueño es demostrarle a la gente, a la sociedad, que nosotras no estamos hechas o diseñadas para el sexo. Ninguna mujer fue diseñada para ser utilizada para el sexo.
I was like, I would never, ever do that, ever. Didn't think I would be the one up on the corner. But now I got it together. I'm on the right path, and I'm actually, for the first time, I'm happy. And I'm doing all right.
I was in a sex trade for 9 years, so it taught me a lot, a hell of a lot. I didn't recognize a lot until I exited, and when I say, I mean years after.
I never thought that I would be out of the life. Never. I thought I would die in there, in the life. But I didn't. No. Nobody was touching me anymore. You know, I didn't have to take my clothes off. I didn't have to, people treated me different. And my self-esteem slowly started growing, slowly, and I started believing in myself.
I'm proud to say that on April 11th, 2016, I celebrated 12 years out of the life and 12 years clean and sober.
When it comes to my story, when it comes to the life, that part of my story, that chapter has been closed. Thinking that I went through something so traumatizing and had to go through a lot, and I've done really good for myself so far.
Una de las cosas que siempre he pensado es que si alguna mujer ve estos testimonios de mujeres por las que hemos pasado en esta situación, que puedan pedir ayuda, que no estamos solas.
I'm completely, totally an open book now. And it feels really empowering to be able to speak about it and to not live with that shame, like you can't talk about this.
To be able to do something positive with cameras in my face, it feels good, and it feels good to not just go home or just be here and be heard, and yeah, it feels good.
So we are almost finished up here. But some things to remember, survivors are incredible survivors. Kids honor their how they survive, right? They're self-reliant, they're often identifying as part of communities with a history of experiencing systemic depression. And we know sex industry too is the intersection of all of us, of all oppressions. They're usually seeking respect and understanding from the square world. You know, they were told that no one outside of the life will ever understand or, you know, help you or any of those things, right? And they expect to, be continually just disrespected and misunderstood. I'll add to this, like, some of the, you know, survivors we've worked with have been like some of the most hilarious people I've ever met in my life. Like, humor is a coping mechanism, right? But they're also, you know, they're so strong. They're incredible people, and like they, you know, are just like everyone else. They've just experienced so many vulnerabilities and things that led them to where they are, right? So some notes from our survivor leader expert. Resiliency building is reminding people that what lies inside them is stronger than anything that has happened to them, and they're not what has happened to them. Replacing a relationship to your pimp with service providers takes assertive engagement from those professionals. And survivors need to know that they belong and are worthy of the relationship. It's the relationships to new safe people that pull you out of the game more than anything else. So who do you contact? That is our mainline number somewhere. Oh yeah, up here I have a bunch of flyers in English and Spanish. If you have new referrals, that's also our email, but you can make referrals via the main line too. And then we also provide technical assistance over the phone, resource referrals, all of those things. And so, yeah, 24/7, 365 days a year, main line is open. And then my email's up there as well. So, yeah, go ahead.
We never answered her question about case management, what that looks like.
Yeah. Do you have more questions about, or case management, just like?
I was just like curious what, like, when someone calls the safety like who calls and how do these people come onto your caseload most generally? And like, how do you start working with them? And like, what is the process? Right, I guess part of it.
Yes. So most of our referrals come from community partners of some kind. Victims don't self-identify as victims. 99% of the time. And if they do have that language, like, are they already interacted with other service providers? They, you know, like, are somewhere else in kind of their journey. Maybe they're reliving their trauma when they call us, or something like that. But it's really rare that, like, unless we're already working with someone, that they call us and identify in that way. But yeah, so we have an hour actually on-scene response time, 24 hours a day to law enforcement, the juvenile department, DHS, and medical personnel. So if any of those 4 entities call us within an hour, we will have an answer there. Anyone else, we will connect as soon as possible, probably within 24 hours. We'll follow up, and if there's a safe way to connect that individual, we will.
So what do you mean by anyone else? Like that's, we get a ton of referrals from schools, from school counselors, from other kinds of counseling, you know, in the supermarket, like we will take referrals from literally anybody. And then we don't require that there be any confirmed trafficking involved. We'll do our own assessment. If you just have some inkling that might be happening, we'll need to sit down and just have at least one conversation and try to do our own assessment of it.
How do you ensure safety?
We will meet them in a public place. We know if there's actually safe parent, like we can confirm the parent is safe and totally safe. We know sometimes people are and sometimes there's some people will only meet like there's a police presence of people.
And it's like, we don't, you know, it's not only minors we work with, like we do work with people between the ages of 18 and 25 as well. And so, like, oftentimes with minors, like, an easy place to meet with them is like at school per se, or if they're in detention, or you know, again, like if there's like resource home or something like that, we will go there. But it's just wherever we know safe, or you know, we'll meet our participants at like a coffee shop, or anywhere else that's just known as like a safe location.
What are we doing to stop it before, like, I have to say a lot of these children are in foster care and were removed from trauma or biological family, placed in foster care, which is not always safe as well. And they are like, well, the state put me here, and they're gonna kick me out of here and put me in another one, and it's gonna happen there, and maybe they are safer in their minds, but this can't happen. What do you think?
So the question is like, what is being done?
Yeah,
to
what
ensure
are we
that-
doing, like, to stop it before it gets?
Well, this is demand driven, and so like actual prevention would be preventing demand. And so there's always gonna be vulnerable people, they're always gonna be vulnerable to being, thank you. Well, I have like a mental block against the word exploit. It's been a problem for me. There are always gonna be people who want to exploit vulnerable people, and so there is no prevention without ending demand.
And I mean, of course, like awareness is helpful, and like that, what we're doing here, and like, I know that like on state level, like there have repeatedly been like bills to require schools to have like preventative education around like trafficking. Those have not passed yet, but that is like an ongoing conversation that's happening. So. Yeah, and I think that just, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of factors and a lot of like cultural things at play, and yeah. You guys have questions?
Speaking of factors, I'm a service coordinator with intellectual developmental disabled individuals. Is there actually focused data on IDD individuals that have become victims?
Yeah, on IDing, you said? Or what did you say?
Intellectual developmental disabled.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there is. So I would actually go to Polaris, the website I mentioned before. They have like tons of awesome data on this topic. It's like national data. And then also, I'm sure off the top of my head, I cannot think of other resources right now, but like there's a lot of like evidence-based.
So Oregon Disability Rights Oregon is another organization that actually does track that data, and they have a good website, and they have a, I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so they have
crime victim advocates.
Yeah.
Who are awesome. Yeah. Any other